between a quarter and a third of everything that goes into the landfill comes from construction debris. And a big chunk of that is from buildings we tear down and throw away. We're going to have to rethink how we live, but we're also going to have to rethink on the kinds of resources that we don't throw away. And so we have this economic cost of that waste of materials into the landfill, but at the same time there's this huge environmental cost.
All of our existing building stock represents a huge investment of energy, effort, materials. If we start demolishing those buildings, we've lost all of that investment over time.
We've lost buildings recently that we needn't have lost, that had viable economic reuses that were significant historically, culturally, academically, and that would have served a better function in every public sense by being preserved rather than being demolished.
Historic preservation is the physical manifestation of history. It has this environmental impact, has a major role in the quality of life contributions of a community. Preservation brings a sense of history. Preservation brings a sense of evolution. And I think that revolving funds are a perfect example.
So revolving funds come in sometimes as the developer of last resort. They're not afraid to come in and take a big risk with money and invest in the building and make it useful to the neighborhood again. Money is spent on a building is restored, easements are put on it, and the money is recouped, and then they are able to use it for another building. It sort of works over and over and over again with the same money, and the money is recycled. So revolving funds are sort of the early interveners. They're the people who are getting in there and getting things done right now. Revolving funds around the country have saved many different types of buildings. They're out there in Galveston, in New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, Pittsburgh, Macon, all over North Carolina. New statewide funds in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, citywide funds in Boston.
The Alva Kittredge House is a great example of the way HBI works. This is a historic property in Roxbury that has been empty and very distressed. It had been built in 1836 as an elegant, extraordinarily big mansion. 1772 gave us a grant of $150,000. We have about $350,000 worth of our own revolving funds as equity in the project. At the Alva Kittredge House, we will have 5 units of housing, 2 of which will be designated permanently as affordable housing. We received LEED Silver certification for the Eustis Street Firehouse in Roxbury. We just received LEED Platinum certification for the Hayden Building in Chinatown. Bertullo Building comes out of an initiative that HBI began. Our goal was to bring the tools of real estate development, revolving funds, as well as historic preservation to Main Street programs. The revolving fund is often the most important tool in helping to close a project.
Revolving funds around the country have saved many different types of buildings. In Glencoe Village in North Carolina, it saved a whole working village.
There were 32 houses. They were overgrown. They were in various conditions of disrepair, houses that hadn't been occupied in 50 years. When we began our work with Glencoe, you would think we were out of our minds. Glencoe was a complex project, to put it mildly, but we thought this property is of national significance. These places are amazing generators of interest and funding and tourism and great places to live.
People said, "Are you crazy?" Well, I just saw what it could be. Had no idea how quickly the houses would sell, but boy, just loved it. Tax bases in these places are really increasing because you're taking a house that has no value from a tax base standpoint and turning it into properties that may be worth $200,000, $400,000, $500,000. We would estimate at least $15 to $20 million of private investment that's been added to the tax base of Alamance County. When I come out to Glencoe, I'm just constantly amazed at this place. I think revolving funds go to the heart of preservation. It is about preserving buildings. It's not talking about it, it's doing it.
Revolving funds help to save single buildings when they start, whole neighborhoods when they're working well, and entire cities when they're completely successful.
Hurricane Ike was really a surprise for Galveston in many ways. No one was prepared for the amount of water damage that followed. So it had a lot of destruction that people weren't prepared for, didn't know what to do with. Really, the charm and the attraction of Galveston is its historic buildings. Certainly the beach has a value to it, but there's nothing that gives it the greatest identity of its buildings. Shortly after the storm, we were back on the island with a team of staff members who were really trying to reach out to property owners very quickly. Most of the properties on the island had water damage or had water at least in their foundation, depending on where you were. The 1772 Foundation really helped us take the threatened smaller buildings and actually either put them back on foundation or to relocate them to save them. All of those really small properties are so important to telling different pieces of Galveston's history. The Green Revival House became a model property for us, not just that it could survive a hurricane and be resilient for that, but that it could actually be a place that people could live with the least amount of cost as they possibly could. All the techniques and all the things that we did in order to reduce energy, to lower the carbon footprint on the island. It's a wonderful example, and it also got a LEED for Homes Platinum certification.
Well, without the revolving fund, this house right now would be in the landfill.
Most revolving funds, I think, are predicated upon neighborhoods beginning to implode. So the first revolving fund was in Charleston, South Carolina in the mid-50s. About 10 years later, in the mid-60s, the same thing happened in Savannah.
Historic Savannah Foundation's revolving fund has saved well over 360 properties. Charlton Row, Kennedy Row, a lot of properties around Pulaski Square. We did a Lincoln Street initiative. We saved the Scarborough House over on MLK Jr. We've saved big and small. The work is not isolated within the National Historic Landmark District. We're usually on the leading edge. So we're out in those neighborhoods that are hanging in the balance. The cool thing about revolving funds is that they present possibility. There's just great potential, not just for what can be done in terms of saving endangered historic buildings, but how it can transform an organization. If other organizations are looking at this or they're considering it, they really should give it a shot.
Through the efforts of just 20 revolving funds recently surveyed, 2,500 properties have been preserved. That translates into almost 5 million square feet of space saved from demolition. And these buildings have a cumulative value of over $500 million and provide housing for over 6,000 people and generate $3 million in property taxes. And it doesn't take a lot of money to begin a fund. In the Thomas Square neighborhood, the efforts of Historic Savannah Foundation convinced others to get involved. And through their risk, property values have appreciated 100, 500, over 1,000% in the past 10 years.
So the 1772 Foundation is really committed to revolving funds as a technique to save as many historic properties as possible. We are the only nationwide funder that is committed to historic preservation in this way. So it's our goal to grow the entire movement of revolving funds. So if you're a brand new fund starting out, the first thing you can do is go to NDC training with a national trust. You could then apply to the 1772 Foundation for a feasibility study to see if it's even going to work in your community. You could then ask for funding for a business plan. If everything is still going well, you can get some seed capital from us, and once you start revolving structures, we might recapitalize your fund.
The rest of the country is learning the value of revolving funds from these long-established, successful ones around the country. They serve as a real demonstration to the public and the private sector on how historic buildings can be treated, how they can be cost-effective. It really has had a long-term positive effect.
I heard someone say the other night that our job as historic preservationists is to ensure safe passage of these beautiful historic buildings to future generations. And I love that thought. I mean, they're not ours to own or to control as much as to steward through to the people who will come after us.